Hi there, so I'm Stephen, and I joined Amazon 7.5 years ago on a secret project. When I interviewed for the company, they wouldn't tell me anything about what it was about, only that it was super cool. And then when I received my offer, they wouldn't add any more. So I was faced with a bit of a red pill, blue pill moment. Should I stick with my comfortable job, or should I take a leap into the unknown and join Amazon? And I took the red pill, and I'm glad that I did. Because that team turned out to be working on this idea that you could put a device in your home that you could talk to, and it would do things for you, like play music, get you the news, help you buy things, and so on. That team, of course, was the Amazon Echo team, and what became Alexa. Alexa hadn't joined the team at that point, obviously. In fact, they didn't have a line of code in speech recognition or spoken language understanding. But I've been with them ever since, and right now I manage the product team for our conversational AI technology. This is the technology that powers Alexa conversations and the night out experience that I hope some of you saw at the keynote this morning, where users can interact more fluidly on their terms with systems, multiple systems, in a fluid way, and developers can build those much more easily. But what we're going to talk about today is more than just Alexa and Amazon. It's about the bigger picture of the trends that we've seen that have got us to this point, and that are taking us further beyond, and what the future holds in terms of interacting with computers in a conversational manner. So in terms of what we'll cover, we'll go through what is conversational interaction, what does it mean, and especially what does it mean to real people on the ground, and talk about how did we get here, what are the technology trends that got us to this point, and then where we're going after that, what kind of opportunities do we expect to see. And then talk about next steps for you as businesses, organizations, and companies in the space in terms of how to think about those trends and take advantage of those for your customers. So first of all, the even bigger picture in terms of the advances in AI, my boss at several levels of remove, talks about these things in very clear ways. And for me, these quotations resonate on a couple of levels. The first is coming out of the realm of science fiction. As humans, we build stories and movies and so on, imagining what machine intelligence is like. And we've typically projected our desires and fears on what that world might look like. And as we'll see as we go through this, that human response to artificial intelligence is a big part of how successful the experiences can be. And secondly, it's not just specific fields in AI that are advancing. We're seeing these fields advance, but they're also working together and complementing each other. Jeff talks about natural language understanding and machine vision, for example. I've got an example later on where those two come together in a very convenient conversational manner for customers to get things done very, very quickly. So the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts, and it's going some really, really exciting places. And we characterize the transition for conversational interaction in particular in these terms, going from the transactional to the conversational. And so today, reinforcing the points that Rohit made in the keynote, people are doing things in very transactional ways. You're fixed by the devices, the user experience mechanisms that the developer gives you when you interact with your systems. You're using keyboard, you're using touch potentially. If you're very good at multitasking, you can do both and have a cup of coffee as well. But you're still doing it on their terms. And whenever there's anything that's harder to do or you have a question about, it's much easier to use your voice. When you talk to colleagues, when you talk to salespeople, when you talk to your friends, there's a back and forth about all kinds of things that's bandwidth outside the narrow UIs of what's happening in the transactional space. Just to give you an example of what the difference is, when I first arrived in the hotel, I was working on the deck, and so I thought I'll quickly get a takeout from one of the restaurants, bring it back, work on it. And I did all the things through the tablet. It took me, I'd say, 7 or 8 minutes to actually order my simple meal ready for the takeout. And it was difficult. There was a question. I don't know if any of you have tried to do this, but it's very unclear whether you're going to get an in-room dining or you go and pick it up. I think both exist simultaneously for a while. There's a quantum burger at stake. But anyway, so I did that, and so then, okay, great, I'll now walk the 3 miles from my hotel room down to the casino and through there. I get to the restaurant, and the order didn't go through. They got a problem with their systems. So why don't you give us your order now, they said. And so I gave it to a human who was working the restaurant. And I did that, and I now had a choice of the things that I could do. I actually changed my order, and I did it with that human person with a back and forth that took less than 2 minutes. And I got the meal that I wanted. It was much more easy for me because I was able to do that in a conversational manner rather than using the transactional system of the tablet. What does it really mean to people on the ground? Why should we be doing this? We're not just doing it for the sake of technology. We're doing it because it brings value to customers. And we think of these three themes as driving that value. So the first is it more useful? You can do more things, better things. Is it more convenient? Think about faster, more efficient interaction. And then is there a closer connection with customers? This is important for things like brands where you're presenting a persona or a personality to interact with. And so as we go through the presentation, think about these themes and think about how you interact with your customers on the web and through apps today, or through salespeople, customer service, and so on, and how these can be exploited and driven with some of the technology advances we're thinking about. Just in terms of why it matters now, purely in terms of the takeoff of Alexa, you can see a huge trend that's pointing very far ahead. From 2014 with the first Alexa devices to over 100 million in the world today. And then for the category as a whole, IDC is talking about by 2023 over 240 million shipments. Numbers of developers. Again, we started with just a handful of experiences available on the Alexa in 2014. And actually over 300,000 now across 180 countries. And being very prolific. There are over 90,000 skills on Alexa today compared to the 13 that there were at launch. So how did we get to this point? What are the trends that led to that upsurge in engagement with smart speakers? What are the things that had to come together to make it work? So we'll take a whirlwind tour through history here. I'm not going to do justice on any side of this, but give you the bigger points in terms of what was going on. And first of all, the infrastructure really had to be there for anything to happen with the technologies that we're talking about. And so form factors moving from the desktop into our pockets, into mobile areas and different devices getting smarter is one thing. The availability of cloud services and raw compute at scale with high availability, reliability, and so on, to do things like machine learning model training, complex runtimes using lots of data, and so on. And the availability of internet content as well. The actual set of things that you interact with and that you consume is also there. And it's on this basis that the innovation has happened in the key technology areas that we will look at that bring together the conversational experience. And the story in all of these areas is really of technologies that have been baking slowly for a long time that have now reached maturity and this tipping point where they're able to work together in these experiences. And a credit to any of the scientists, engineers, and product managers and program managers who've worked on this for a long time. We've been through a number of AI winters and AI springs. But conversational interaction right now, as we've shown with the demo, really is something real. It's actually funny. When I joined the industry about 20 years ago working on speech recognition, there was a bittersweet joke in the community. It was speech recognition, it's the way of the future. And it always will be. and that hurt. That hurt because we always felt we were on the brink of something, but the adoption wasn't there. The engagement just wasn't happening. There were narrow areas of solutions that just weren't hitting the big time. But now I'm happy to say the future has arrived. That joke isn't funny anymore. So let's quickly run through these. So recognizing speech itself, that's a hard problem. It's the challenge of taking an audio signal, getting words out of that to process later on. It's hard given background noise. It's hard given people's accents. It's hard given the vocabulary that people use. And progress was a little slow. So let me fill out the timeline here. And it's really a story of going from very limited, very discrete recognition capabilities, starting with single digits back in the 1960s, increasing the vocabulary gradually, being able to deal with continuous speech instead of broken up words, getting to large vocabulary with things like the Dragon Naturally Speaking System, on desktops. And then with Siri, actually making a useful experience on a phone. But the real breakthrough came with far-field speech recognition that's led to the kind of growth we're talking about today in the smart speaker category, which released the user from even having to touch a device at all. So for the first time, you were able to interact hands-free and eyes-free with your systems with high accuracy. This is a major liberation for somebody in the kitchen who's chopping up onions or doing the dishes. You can play the music, you can get the weather, you can set alarms very, very easily without needing to use your hands or anything like that. And the Amazon speech team solved this with a lot of machine learning algorithms, the data, the raw compute that was available, and really brought that sort of breakthrough moment for interaction in speech. So what happens next? Once we get the words from the speech recognizer, the language understanding and the dialogue part. And so if you take a command like play songs by the Rolling Stones, how do we know to do something in the music domain with that, and in particular with the Rolling Stones? So we have some techniques there. It's hard to scale if you try and base that on all the rules that people might say, you know, play the Rolling Stones, play music by the Rolling Stones, I want to hear the Rolling Stones, all kind of variants like that. And so a machine learning approach, we started with that when we built the first Alexa system. And we thought we'd done pretty well. We had an internal demo where we showed people. People asked all kinds of things like that. You know, play some Lady Gaga. I want to hear Sting. Play some jazz music. All that stuff worked really well. And then one person came up and said, Alexa, play some good music. And she came right back and said, you don't have any good music. And that would have been fighting talk in my teenage years growing up. But it was because you know, we had a system that recognized genre, okay, you know, play some jazz music, play some rock music. But because of the machine learned system, we interpreted good as a genre, not as a judgmental comment on the music. And so we're always learning about things. And the thing that illustrates is, in general, users will surprise you with the things that they say, no matter what you expect, there'll be things outside it. But also, that something as simple as that, you don't have any good music, is almost a threat, and is an insult to the user that Alexa said in good faith. And that's something we'll talk about in terms of, again, the personality and the persona and how you present a human image or not to your users. So some of the advances here, I'll kind of skip through these. Has anybody ever played with Eliza? That's an interesting system from the 1960s, way before my time, where you can basically give Eliza a problem. She'll turn your words back on you in a quite a clever way. If you say, you know, Eliza, I'm depressed, she'll say, well, why is it that you're depressed? And, you know, keep you generating the conversation. And it kind of pointed, it was exciting then. It excited a lot of people because it seemed to suggest that there was some intelligence around the corner, that a simple thing could do this, and there was a little bit of, you know, tiny spark of magic maybe that that something else was going to happen. But it actually didn't for a long time. We had the command and control systems for a while that were generally sort of fixed patterns. Spoken dialogue came into the picture with telephone IVR systems, and these were, let's face it, most of these were really horrible to use. You'd go through all kinds of phone trees. In fact, even the happy path on a telephone IVR system is a miserable place because it takes so long to get through things. They're typically designed by developers who have the idea that in order to get something done, you need to go through all possible categories of getting it done, and you have to do a breadth-first search of the whole tree in order to get to this point. Menu after menu, long prompt after long prompt. I think it actually might have set the field back a while because people lost faith in speech recognition and kept pressing the pound key and pressing pound key harder when it didn't work. A little later, chatbots through text. I think we start to see some interesting things there in terms of utility. Machine learning is coming along at this point, so they're not necessarily all rules-based systems. And then Siri and Alexa today, again, doing comparable things in terms of the language understanding parts and being useful. And managing dialogue as well. In Alexa today, for example, you can say what's the weather in Las Vegas, and then what's the population there across domains. Alexa's smart enough to know that that's a part of the conversation. But some really exciting work is also happening in research through the Alexa Prize, which has just kicked off its third iteration. This is a competition where university students are trying to build a social bot, a chat experience via voice over Alexa that can hold your attention meaningfully for 20 minutes. And nobody's quite got there yet. I think there'll be a while to go. But there's some really interesting developments in the field of conversational chat. And it's worth checking out. There's a talk later on today at 4:45 that goes into some of the technology that the students have used in the Alexa Prize and how that's helping maintain interactions with chat customers. Okay, next area, reasoning. What do you do? What's the intelligence on the part of the machine that can help you understand and then deliver the right things for the user? This is a question of increased problem solving in a way. And so, general databases, a great way to represent information and access it, including relations. The first time it starts to become useful in conversational interaction is models of the world where you've got a set of facts and relations about them that you can reason about. So in this case here, I'm not sure if everyone can see it. We've got Big Ben, which is it's actually part of the Houses of Parliament. It's in London. There's an is located in a relationship there. There's another is located in a relationship for London in the UK. United Kingdom, that's a lexical relationship. That's just another way to say the UK, and so on. So a tiny fragment of a knowledge graph here that you can imagine being expanded out and then being used to reason against for a question answering system, for example. And these are great, but knowledge graphs in terms of being able to cover the set of questions that users ask are very difficult. You can't curate them manually. You need to use machine techniques. And so most approaches around about that time, and in terms of the early system that the Alexa question answering system was based on, used to scrape things like Wikipedia as a reliable source of knowledge to get information like that. And so blue cheese dressing, for example, might be in the long tail of questions somewhere. What is blue cheese dressing? And so the team built a web scraper that would highlight the facts, usually in the first part of the entry, that tell us what blue cheese dressing is. And so that's great. Here's the sentences that we can use. But unfortunately, natural language understanding error came into the picture at this point. And when it interpreted the second sentence, it interpreted the it to refer to the United States. And if you read the rest of that sentence and add it to your knowledge base, you'll get a fact in there that says that mayonnaise was used to make the United States of America. And if you'd used that system and happened to ask this at the time, that's the answer you would have got. So happily, we have more techniques than this now. A couple of interesting ones are crowdsourcing. And so Alexa Answers is a community-based, invite-only system where actual real people come and provide answers to real questions that have been asked. And there are obviously strict quality control mechanisms for whether the answers make it back out to Alexa users or not. But also in terms of machine learning. One example is search-based question answering, where instead of trying to find facts in data, put them in the knowledge base, and then answer the question, instead, what if there are answers to your question already out there on the internet that you can map directly? And so using deep learning, they can extract sort of the features of the question and the features of statements on the internet and figure out if one is the answer to the other. And that's pretty exciting, and that's providing a lot of opportunities for better question answering as we go forward. So back to the timeline. And introducing some other areas of inference and reasoning that aren't necessarily rules-based, and building on the machine learning that we just talked about. Amazon recommendations. Jeff Wilkie had much better pictures, by the way, than I do here for this one. He talked about this morning and how they started with simple collaborative filtering and then moved through different models to find the right thing. But it's actually pretty good. There are no rules at play here. It's about people who've behaved like me, who've looked at the things and bought the things that I looked at, have given me certain recommendations. And here's the recommendations that came up while I was putting the talk together in terms of books that I've been interested in before. And it's actually a pretty good body of work in terms of this field, as well as a book on proper English as well, clearly for me. And then other areas as well in relatively narrow domains, but again, using machine learning techniques and inference to be able to have an impact. The IBM Watson system that beat humans at Jeopardy, and the AlphaGo system from DeepMind that beat humans at Go. In all these cases, it's where it's potentially relatively narrow domains, but the application of problem solving in these particular areas using data and using techniques like this, shows a lot of promise and has got us to the point where we are today. And then the fourth area is persona. This is the area where human interacts with machine, and the human brings a lot of context to this area. And it's something that's not so well understood, even though it really is the point where you're either going to win or lose trust with your customers. And something that I think understanding of has been relatively late to the picture. Just to illustrate how important it is, these are reviews from various Echo and related devices that have Alexa that people have submitted. They think of Alexa in terms of being a member of the family, as being able to fill gaps as well in terms of companionship or other areas for people who need that. And so the social impact of what we're doing in the conversational interaction space is pretty impactful here. And so to illustrate just key parts of that, I'm going to skip. I'm going to cheat by showing two ends of the spectrum of first of all the sound of the voice. When you interact with voice, it's a very human thing to form a picture of the person or the thing that you're talking to. And we'll go to the two ends of the scale here in terms of one of the first systems called the Voda that was built in the 1950s. I'll just play a sample from this. There's a radio announcer who's going to announce what the...
Will you please make the voter say for our Eastern listeners, good evening, radio audience. Good evening, radio audience. And now for our Western listeners, say, good afternoon, radio audience. Good afternoon, radio audience.
Okay, so it was lucky the announcer said what the system was going to say, because it's unclear people would have got it otherwise from an intelligibility perspective. And then in terms of the picture that you form of what's creating that voice, it sounds well-meaning, but I think there's something else there as well. But now let me jump straight ahead and skip decades of research to the state of the art and what we call the neural TTS system that's in Alexa today.
Pike Place Market is a public market overlooking the Elliott Bay waterfront in Seattle. The market opened August 17, 1907, and is one of the oldest continuously operated public farmers markets in the United States. It is a place of business for many small farmers, craftspeople, and merchants.
So I hope you'll agree that's a little better than the 1950s. I won't say any more about this, but there is a talk on the Alexa system and all the work that's gone into making it more human-like, including a bit of a deeper dive in terms of history. That's tomorrow at 2:15, and I'd recommend you go to that if you're interested in the text-to-speech area. Outside of the voice and other forms of interaction, the command line personality really wasn't much of a thing for a while. I think syntax error was the greeting that most people got for most of these areas as well. But the other interesting thing is that you didn't necessarily need a voice or even text to form a bond with a machine. And so when Roombas came out, they do little more than beep and move around. But people started to give them names and thinking about what sort of bond that they might be forming with them. And the fact that there is an autonomous thing that moves around by itself and maybe it beeps at you is something that people can project a sort of character, maybe it's pet-like in this case, onto it. And so the anthropomorphization impulse is certainly there, even outside of the speech space, and it's important. One last development here is, I think, a peek into the future. So Whisper mode, which we implemented on the Alexa in the US relatively recently, allows you to set the mode whereby if you whisper to Alexa, she'll whisper back. And that's super practical when it comes to you've got a sleeping baby or partner and you want to set an alarm for the morning, but you don't want to wake them up. super useful. But then there's also a little twinge when you try it, when you first do it. You whisper to Alexa, set an alarm. And she whispers back, alarm set for 7 a.m. And you're in cahoots. You're complicit in either good or evil with what you're doing, but you're not disturbing the other people. And it's a really interesting experience the first time. And so again, that social dimension of what's happening as you interact with Alexa and how that reflects with other people is a big thing to think about as we look at the persona aspects of conversational interaction. Great, so that's how we got here. Like I said, a story of technologies getting better and better, and then really taking off as some of that infrastructure came into place and starting to allow us to do more with what we can. And then what will happen as these continue? So where are we going, and how can we think about taking advantage of it? What are the opportunities for you and your customers? So we'll come back to these three areas that we talked about, and the opportunities presented in each area. So first of all, more useful. In this area, we're looking at a little bit like the night out scenario, more complex goal handling than you can do today. This drives more opportunities to automate the things that you couldn't do necessarily over transactional systems you now can do today, which drives more complex goals in themselves. So what are some examples of those? So building on the night out experience that maybe you saw, these two queries could land you with the same tickets at the end of the day. But the work that you had to do in the first case to get them, the fact that you thought of the Avengers Endgame, you thought of the theater, you thought of the time, that work was all on you as a user to think of that. And then you had to formulate that in a nice query. And the AI, if there was any, just helped you bring that to a close. But given the broader query, what should I do tonight? I don't know yet. I don't know what movie I want to watch. I don't know where it's on or anything like that. This is where the conversation interaction system can help. And it moves that cognitive burden to your ability to interact piece by piece instead of having to preconceive this whole query. And the kicker here is that if you're doing this, you're not necessarily limited to going to the movie theater. As we saw, you could add the restaurant and the cab very easily in a system that understands that those services are there and can offer them to you to make a difference. Second example, what should I make for dinner? A big problem in my house. If you try this today on the web, you get all kinds of 25 top rapid meals or 50 pasta dishes to cook, and you have to do a lot of searching through those. What do you want? Or you've got a finely crafted query on Epicurious or something that knows what you're like. But again, a system here that's able to work through with you, well, what's in the fridge? How long do you have? And it knows ideally that maybe you're a vegan or you have a nut allergy, and to avoid those things. That's going to be a much smoother experience and more useful to you as you work through something like this as a user. And this kind of sort of ambiguous problem is interesting from the context of not just transactional things like getting a recipe going and that sort of thing, but also problem solving in a sense of customer service. If there are you think about the instruction manuals and the ability to interact with those online in a conversational way. Some of the techniques that we'll talk about could be interesting for this as well. And finally, an even more ambiguous problem, and potentially with a more impactful outcome as well. My grades aren't good. Right? There's no clear solution to this point, but. An intelligent system could, well, in the immediate future, I don't think we'd expect it to solve all these problems for you by itself. But in the short term, it could help you with understanding, where you're falling down and what services there are available in terms of educational software or tutors with availability nearby and that sort of thing, and help you make a start on how you can help solve that problem. So higher and higher order reasoning and problem solving is a direction I think that we're likely to see. Even more. So how would systems work with this? I'm not going to talk through this in a lot of detail, But this is a sort of high-level conceptual architecture of what the different sort of high-level components might be. So if we have the user over here on the left speaking to a device, and the typical services and API calls that are happening, this is where either the recipe service is maybe, or the cinema booking service and so on, and what happens in between. So the planning component is really about the action prediction. What should I do given what the user said, and given the set of services that are available to me, and the knowledge that's available to me as well, the context that's there that I can use. And so an utterance comes in. The language understanding component there can help think about, okay, so what is the user actually asking for? Are there entities such as a cinema name or a time that I can use to fill out my understanding? The conversational context reflects what's there already. What have we learned from the conversation so far, and how can we use it? Maybe we filled in a value. Maybe we've got the movie so far, for example, and we need the theater and the time. And then there's the inference component around what other how can I use knowledge to enhance this situation as well. And so in the personalized knowledge case, maybe that's the user's zip code or their preferences for thrillers over comedies that would help inform how you would make the call to the APIs. And in the world knowledge case, the general knowledge case, it's about dinner and a movie and the laws of physics. How much time between the movie and the dinner makes sense? What's the speed of ground speed of an unladen human in the streets of Las Vegas? As well as simple questions like you just booked a movie followed by dinner. You're going to book a cab. You shouldn't really book the cab to get to the dinner. You should book it to get to the movie because that starts first. There are basic things like this that are typically rule-based today in thousands of developers, individual code that would play a part in these kinds of scenarios. Okay, and then one final example on the problem side of things, and this is where sometimes we will get problems that users aren't even telling us about, but can we do something with those? Because this is, on the surface, there's a simple weather query, right? What's the weather like in Tahoe this weekend? Boom, sunny, 80 degrees, we're done. That's it, we've satisfied the user, right? Well, what if I live in Seattle and I'm asking this question, where it always rains? And I ask this, not out of academic curiosity or Seattle masochism, where is it sunny? But Tahoe is a great destination for a weekend. I can do things there. Maybe I'm thinking about booking a trip, or maybe I've booked a trip and I'm thinking about what clothes to bring and do I want to hike or things like that. And so, but the user hasn't told us any of that. They've just given us a weather query. And so in this case, we need to think about, it's a really interesting area of, is there a latent problem behind any of the questions that systems are asking us? And as you look at the expertise side of problem solving, it's not going to be the case we think that one assistant is going to be all good at everything, all knowing, and better than all the others at everything. No. Multiple AIs mean that different services can do different things and specialize and do better in certain cases. And so from that perspective, Alexa and Cortana are already friends. You can invoke one from the other on devices that typically support the ones. And users like to do that. They know that Cortana might be better at something. They know that Alexa might be better at another thing. And we're starting to see this already with skills today. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are at least 4 ELIZA skills in the skill store today, dispensing psychological advice to those who, or at least making people talk in ways that ELIZA does. A little bit more interestingly, there are specialist information sites in areas like medicine, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory actually has a skill as well. And you'd want to go to sources like these when you've got an injury that you don't know how to handle, for example. You want to know more about whether people can sustain life on Mars. And so we expect to see more of these coming along as, in addition to being knowledge sources, but bringing their own sort of reasoning and knowledge and sort of specialist AIs as part of that conversational interaction. and it should be a world where people can access those without having to break the convenience factor. Okay, let's move into the next area. That was utility. This is now convenience, and this is about removing friction, making things easier for customers, basically meeting customers on their terms in terms of how they interact, what they want to do, where they are. And if we dive into that, the device types now where we see interaction happening are growing fast. The car, the systems are in there already. The Echo Auto is out, for example, but it's not just about bringing an assistant into the car and doing the same things that you would before. There are also signals from your car that you can use that can be more helpful in fusion with others that help you out. Let's say the car is low on gas. That's the signal from your car. Let's say you have a meeting on your calendar at 9 a.m. That's a signal from your calendar. And let's say the traffic time for you to get between your home and work is X minutes. A reasoning system can use that and figure out, do you need to set off earlier if you're going to need to drop by the gas station in order to get to work on time, and that sort of thing. Convenience on the go as well, so wearables, things like, this is the Alexa-enabled Jabra wireless headphones, for example, watches, other things like that, really do bring it to the customer in terms of in-the-moment interaction on the public transport, on the bicycle, wherever you are. Being able to interact, again, with your hands free is a liberating factor, as well as being much safer than walking around with your head buried in your phone as a pedestrian. Smarter houses and the signals that come from those that we can use. We've seen many new smart home devices that are smarter, giving signals, the thermostats, and so on, all over the house, switches, controls like that. And working in concert for those, again, the fusion of these sensors, we're starting to see as well. Rohit mentioned a couple of things. Alexa Guard, where we can listen to, is a smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detector going off, is there glass breaking, and alert you if that's a problem in the house. Similarly with Alexa Hunches, do you usually switch all the lights off, but there's one left on tonight? Should you get a suggestion to turn that off? So again, the intelligence that's bringing together the information from these sensors and making a smart choice for you in the form of a suggestion. And let's not forget the office as well. The smart meeting room, for example, that knows about a calendar meeting for which it's booked. And it knows that you might need to kick off a video conference call. It knows certain people are in or out of office. Right now, somebody in the meeting room has to do all that by themselves and go through the standard 5 minutes to get the video conference call going. But if you could interact conversationally inside the room with a virtual assistant for the meeting, you'd be able to figure all that stuff out much more efficiently. Okay, so given those sensors, what are the kinds of things that actually help with interaction as well? And so simple location awareness is a good one, because voice notifications are useless if they're not delivered to you. They're transient. It's a bit like the tree falling in the forest. If a notification is delivered in a room that nobody's actually in, did the notification happen? Well, to all intents and purposes, it didn't, because you weren't there. And so just knowing from an audio perspective, if somebody's in the room, if it's worth delivering the notification, is useful. And also being able to interact with more surfaces as well. The idea that conversation plus rich visual information in a multimodal sense can help drive more convenience for customers. Let's say you have you're looking at a hotel or an Airbnb listing. You want to figure out, well, okay, what's the room layout? Where are the bathrooms? Are they big enough? What are the views like? What are the reviews? That would take a lot of hunting and pecking through the UI if you wanted to do that by touch. But with a conversational interface, it becomes much easier. And then the addition of cameras. And so this is actually me in my house with a bottle of HP sauce. I was making a bacon sandwich, and connoisseurs of the bacon sandwich will know that HP sauce is necessary. I was making a bacon sandwich, and I realized we were running low. and putting at risk the next generation of bacon sandwiches. So, but I was easily able to solve this situation by walking up to my Echo Show, and I said, "Buy this," and I held the bottle out to the camera on the device, and the little firefly started, and it recognized the label, and then offered me bottles of HB sauce to buy, and whatever delivery date I wanted. And so that was super helpful for me. The situation was saved for the next round. And then more interesting still is the idea that you don't necessarily need smart devices or very rich devices in order to have interesting experiences using a conversational assistant as well. The Echo buttons are there, great for things like triggering routines or playing games. But there have been a couple of innovative startups who've done interesting things in this space as well. One of them is called Novel Effects. And they have a system whereby if a child reads a book aloud, they can produce a soundscape with sound effects and music and so on as they go along, kind of encouraging that child to read as well as providing a more interesting experience. Similarly, Sensible Objects made a game called When in Rome, which is a board game that you play normally, except you play it with Alexa. And Alexa takes part in the game as well. Again, bringing the conversational assistant into a world, into your environment, with some very simple, virtual things like board games or reading a book and that sort of thing. And we think that's an area that's going to be ripe for invention and for opportunity in terms of how you can bring engagement with customers. Okay, let's look at some output devices and the kinds of interaction to happen there. This is no longer my house, I hasten to add. The kinds of things that, there are screens littered, literally in our place, around the house. And so things like tablets, PCs, phones, TVs, and so on are pretty much everywhere. And how can they play a role in conversational situations going forward? Well, in the kitchen, a portable tablet is great for recipes and that sort of thing. For movies, think about the night-in scenario, right? What if we could choose a movie and get a food delivery? You could spend your time, choosing the movie with looking at ratings, reviews, and so on, potentially simultaneously on that big screen. You can get the Amazon restaurants or the Uber Eats order going at the same time. And that becomes a useful confluence of services based around the screen in your home. And then again, productivity, the things that we do when we produce slides and spreadsheets and documents, needing to get data from one place, pulling in quotes from somewhere else. How can conversational interaction make that easier? And then again, not to forget the office. There's a reason whiteboards are popular. And papers hung on walls. They're actually so popular at Amazon, even the elevators have whiteboards and marker pens in them for that in the moment inspiration. And it's true that in a meeting when somebody jumps up and actually draws something on the board or writes something on the board that's been going on, it's helpful to bring back. It drives the efficiency of the meeting. And so things like smarter screens and whiteboards in the office can also play an interesting role in driving agendas forward, logging notes, and then being able to interact with them afterwards in a conversational way. Okay, and the last area was the closer connection. And so this is about the connection that users feel to the conversational systems that they interact with. And the key thing here is around engagement, and also not just in terms of new, but deeper ways. And I would say that this is probably the area that's least well understood of the things that we're talking about. There's only been so much that we can understand given the systems that are out there today in terms of human responses, but they're very enlightening when we do come across them. So let's start with the idea of interactive competence, and this means how will systems get better at actually interacting in different ways. I'm going to start with an extreme here. Did anybody see the I think it's 2018 Super Bowl ad for Alexa, where Alexa lost her voice? Various actors came in to help out. And the comedy value for this one was in the huge delta between a standard Alexa interaction and what was happening with Anthony Hopkins in his chaise longue with the peacocks feeding them crunchy things, and Rebel Wilson in the bath and so on, and being very, 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 very human, as opposed to standard Alexa. And that's something where it sort of shows, yes, you can get more and more human-like, but at a point you're over human-like. Overdoing that is a sort of a risk area. And so as our text-to-speech synthesis gets better and gets more human-like, again, I recommend you go to the talk on the TTS system to see what sorts of limits to think about there. But it's not just about the voice, it's about how the interaction happens. And today, with virtual assistants, there's a very rigid turn-taking model. You have to say Alexa, for example, to begin every turn, unless you're in a skill or a dialogue. And that's hard to break. We've started to break it down with a feature called follow-up mode, where after Alexa's finished speaking, she'll keep the microphone open. You can follow up with questions after that. But in general, there's so much more rich interaction happening when humans talk together. They'll interrupt each other. Their voices will speed up for excitement or slow down to make a point. You'll hear filler hums and ha's in terms of filling the gap between while they're still thinking about what to speak. And we don't see this kind of behavior from virtual assistants yet. And yet it is something that drives for efficiency. It drives some more faster completion of dialogues, but it also brings, again, that human angle that you don't always expect from a machine. And then finally, just to iterate the point that interacting with families, you really can't have a simple one-size-fits-all persona. You can't imagine that your user is just one thing, because children are very different. All grown-ups talk to children differently than they do to other grown-ups. And children expect that too. And we've had some great feedback on our services that are actually children directed on that content, but not just the content as well, the manners side of things. The parents want their children to learn how to say please and thank you properly, and Alexa should be a role model in terms of having them do that. Another area where the social competence dimension is going to come in. And the last part here is advances in recognizing emotion and how that can help in terms of the connection and the closeness with your customers. And so we're starting to see on certain dimensions that you're able to, given the sound of a voice, predict to some extent whether there's happiness, surprise, sadness, and so on in the voice of the user. And so this can help with things like if you've got a frustrated or an angry customer, if you know that, you're able to deal with that very differently in terms of how you want to handle them, not just in terms of the persona that you might present, but also maybe you actually want to get them to a real human at this point, and so on. So opportunities there in terms of allowing interactions to actually be more empathetic, more helpful, and building trust and engagement. And there's actually, on the speech emotion detection, there's another talk on that from the team that built that capability in Alexa. That is today at 4:45. If you're interested in going to that, it's called speech emotion detection. It's actually in this room. Okay, so what are the next steps here? Let's go back into the key theme that we talked about at the start, so transactions to conversations. And when you think about all the things that you're doing with your customers on the web and through apps and through your salespeople and through customer service, what are the things that how are you interacting, and how can you think about enhancing those services in the way that we talked about, the greater utility, the greater convenience, and the greater connection. The key thing is that the barrier to entry for doing this is getting lower and lower, because the kinds of tools that are coming out, especially the Alexa Conversations tools that were enabled today, really make it a lot simpler for you to build on the core capabilities that are in voice services like Alexa, the big the planning architecture and so on that we saw before. Very simple ways to plug in and have your system play a role within those kinds of experiences. Other companies today are thinking about this in terms of hiring voice UX designers, for example. That's a relatively new category of design that's very specialist. It's very easy to get wrong, and people know that, and they're hiring for it. They're also adopting agencies as well who've got expertise in this space and can help build out proof of concepts and also whole systems for you. Okay, so just to re-summarize those areas and the key themes to think about again. Driving of more complex goals on the utility side and how you can automate. The richer input and output that's possible that would help with convenience and engagement. And then the more natural interaction for deepening engagement and trust in the form of connection, what that means for persona. A great place to start for this would be to look at some of the other talks that are going on. I mentioned a couple of them, but here are some ones that are very directly related to what we've been talking about today. Alexa Conversations, the business angle to that in terms of what's interesting to companies as they look at their solution is going to be in this room at 2:15 right after this talk. Sanju is going to talk about that along with some partners who are involved in the night out experience. And then tomorrow at 2:15, there's the developer perspective on Alexa Conversations. We'll talk about how we built the night out scenario, as well as the tools that are available in order for you to start building when that becomes available. And then finally, I mentioned the Alexa Prize for the social conversations, the chatbot experience, and we've got a talk on what we're learning there from the university teams and some of the approaches that are bearing fruit in the social conversation space. That's today at 4:45. And with that, I will say thank you.